Welcome back to the podcast, where we slow down just enough to look past the noise of the headlines and find the human moments that actually matter. Today's episode is intentionally calm, gentle and cosy, because we're talking about Meghan, Duchess of Sussex's Christmas message. A note that feels far less like a formal public statement and much more like a handwritten card left on a kitchen counter beside a warm mug of tea. It's a message filled with images of pyjamas, cookies left out for Santa, board games scattered across the table, sleepy dogs curled up in the corner, and that quiet joy that only shows up when the world finally goes still for a moment, and in a time when everything often feels rushed, loud and demanding. This message feels like an invitation to exhale, to settle in, and to remember that sometimes the softest moments are the most meaningful. In her Christmas message, Meghan shares a picture of how her family spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, using small, intimate details to paint a scene that feels warm and familiar rather than distant or polished, talking about nibbling leftovers from their Christmas Eve dinner, wrapping a few last-minute gifts late at night, and tiptoeing downstairs with her husband to make sure Santa's cookies had been eaten and the reindeer's carrots were gone, all in the service of keeping that fragile childhood magic alive for just a little longer. She imagines Christmas Day unfolding slowly with pyjamas worn all day, quiet board games like Scrabble or Sequence for the adults and Candyland for the kids, candles flickering softly, music playing low in the background, dogs snoring nearby, and those long, slow, grounding breaths that only seem to happen when there is finally nowhere else you need to be. And she closes by extending a wish of peace and blessing to everyone, whether they are surrounded by family, with friends, or entirely on their own, making the message feel simple, gentle, deeply intentional, and quietly inclusive. What makes this message stand out is that it isn't a glossy photo opportunity or a carefully staged royal announcement, but rather a form of storytelling built entirely out of small, ordinary moments like cookies, carrots, pyjamas, board games, and snoring dogs. And it's precisely those unremarkable details that make it feel so human, so relatable, and so emotionally soft. It gently reminds us that behind every title, every public role, and every headline, there are still parents moving quietly through their homes late at night, trying not to wake their children while they create little pockets of magic. And in doing so, the message quietly delivers a powerful truth: that joy rarely lives in grand gestures or perfect presentations, but in the tiny rituals we repeat with care. There is something deeply intentional about choosing to highlight stillness instead of spectacle, family instead of formality, and calm instead of performance. And this message reflects a conscious decision to center privacy, presence, and emotional warmth rather than image or status. The Sussexes have spoken often about protecting their inner life, and here that philosophy shows up not as a statement, but as a feeling, a quiet way of saying, we're not offering perfection for you to admire, we're sharing a feeling for you to recognize. And that feeling is one of safety, warmth, presence, and belonging, which feels especially meaningful in a season when so many people feel overwhelmed, lonely, pressured to perform happiness, or disconnected from what the holidays are supposed to be about, making this message feel less like a broadcast and more like a permission slip to slow down. This message resonates because it doesn't feel like it belongs only to Meghan or to a famous family, but because it reflects experiences that so many people quietly recognize as their own. The late-night wrapping when your eyes are tired, but your heart feels full. The peaceful hush of a house after everyone has fallen asleep. The comforting smells of candles, food, and clean pyjamas, and that deep breath you take when you finally sit down and realize that, for now, everything is okay. It reminds us that the magic of Christmas isn't loud, dramatic, expensive, or perfectly staged for social media, but quiet, ordinary, fleeting, and therefore precious. And that is exactly why it feels so powerful. Whether you adore Meghan, feel neutral about her, or simply encountered this message in passing, one thing is difficult to deny. This message isn't about status, image, or presentation. It's about softness, gentleness, and emotional honesty. It's a reminder that we are allowed to choose calm over chaos, closeness over performance, and small joys over big expectations, and that we are allowed to define what our holidays look like in ways that feel safe and meaningful to us. And perhaps that freedom to choose our own version of joy is the most generous gift hidden inside this simple note. Thank you for spending these few cozy minutes with me today, and for choosing to slow down and listen in a season that often asks us to rush. However you're spending your holidays, whether you're surrounded by family, sharing time with friends, or spending these days quietly on your own, I hope you find moments of peace, warmth, rest, and gentleness that stay with you long after the decorations come down. From my heart to yours, happy holidays, and thank you for listening.